Welcome to Practicing Trust, growing in the disciplines of silence, solitude, and simplicity. We'll talk about that in a minute and just what to expect over these next 3 weeks. I'm hoping that this can be I don't want to just be talking to you. I hope we can have some interaction, that as we look at some scriptures, I'd love to hear what you guys are seeing from them as we share what we're seeing in them and our thoughts on this, on these practices and these disciplines and disciplines in general. But before we get into the class, I just want to begin with a 2-minute meditation.
Hold on, let me close the door.
We've got some more folks coming in. So we got a chair here, a chair here. I think there's one chair in the back. Carolina's got another chair she's pulling up. And we could probably position these chairs, if I could get some strong folks to maybe position these in a way that people could use them.
Okay.
That would be
I'm gonna try to
cool.
see if this
Thank
one
you.
closes up.
Yeah, turn them, angle them. These ones are super heavy and like a wall. So maybe just the small ones. If anyone wants to sit up here, that's a little more comfy. That's cool. And welcome. Thanks for joining. We were not sure how many people we would need and how many chairs we would need. Turns out we need more than we thought. Okay, so we're going to begin with just a 2-minute silent meditation. This is how Carolina and I like to begin our teen classes. And the meditation, I'd like us to all just take 2 minutes to rest on the word and the idea of Christ-like. Galatians 2:20 says, I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. This Christ-like nature is one we're hoping to take on with these disciplines. And so I have a timer, and I'm going to start it in a second. You will hear a gong to begin. At 1 minute, you'll hear a knock, and then a gong to close us out. And just for these 2 minutes, breathe easily, set your mind to this idea, and whatever the Spirit brings about to you. If you feel your mind wandering, it's okay. Just bring your focus back to the word Christ-like and that idea. If you find that it's totally wandered and gone, you go, where have I been for the last 90 seconds? It's okay. Bring your mind back to this word and this idea, and for these 2 minutes, we'll be there. So like I said, a gong, a knock at 1 minute, and then another gong to close us. And let's begin. Excellent. Thank you, guys. I hope that was helpful to take a moment to center and consider this, our Christ-likeness and our journey towards being like Christ. As we talk about these disciplines, we're talking about trying to become more like Christ. But this idea of being more like Jesus, more like Christ, honestly, for me, hasn't worked for a long time. For me, this phrase of like being more like Jesus infers that I am not like Jesus, and I'm never like Jesus. But my life and experiences show me that actually sometimes I am like Jesus. I do what Jesus would do. I do and think or act in a moment as Christ would. And so rather than thinking about being more like Christ, I like to try to be like Christ more often. And we train to be like Jesus more often through the spiritual disciplines. They're practices that we do intentionally in a regular and habitual manner so that they become a part of our unconscious character. Right? Like I want you to think about Karate Kid and his training in Karate Kid. Mr. Miyagi makes him, wax his car, wax on, wax off. Makes him sand the floor. Makes him paint the fence and paint the house. And this is training for karate, even though the kid doesn't know it yet. But he is practicing these movements and these routines so that they become natural in an unconscious way when the moment calls for. We practice, we rehearse so that when the moment comes, we can practice, we can employ the things that we have learned. Has anyone ever said to you, or have you ever heard the phrase like, who you are when you're alone is who you really are?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a common thing, and I think there's some truth to it. But I'd like for us to consider a bit of a twist on that, is that what you do when you are alone forms who you become. And we're striving to be spiritually formed to be like Jesus. It is our spiritual formational path, to be Christ-like. When the moment arrives, you want to be ready. And you will be ready because you've practiced when it wasn't the moment. And that's practicing trust. And that's practicing just being like Jesus. So, what is the trust that we are practicing? I think the trust that we are practicing through these spiritual disciplines and that we enact and employ when the moment calls for it is a trust that we are good because the Father says we are, a trust that He loves us, and a trust that He finds pleasure in us. I think these are at the root of all acts of spiritual discipline and acts of Christ-likeness. We're living in this trust, but when the moment comes, it's hard to trust that, right? It's hard to be like, I'm not taking control because I trust God's there. Or I'm not going to defend myself because God's got my back. And I believe what God says about me more than what these people are saying about me. It's hard to employ it. So we do these spiritual disciplines to practice so we'll be ready when the moment comes. Now, when it comes to spiritual disciplines, there's a lot of them. We're talking in these next 3 weeks about silence, solitude, and simplicity. But there are many. Reading our scriptures, engaging with the scriptures, prayer, fasting, generosity, tithing, fellowship, evangelism, celebration. These are, and many more, are disciplines that Jesus practiced and that we can practice to be Christ-like when the moment comes. Now, I want to be clear that these spiritual disciplines don't earn us any grace, righteousness, or holiness. And in and of themselves, the acts don't create more gracious, righteous, or holy people. Just practicing silence and solitude doesn't make you more like Jesus by itself. There's an intention that we have to go into it, seeking the presence of the Father. And in that awareness of the presence of God and our humble response to his presence, well, while we're practicing these disciplines, any of the disciplines, it'll foster the growth of righteousness and holiness that connects us more and more deeply to the Father's grace. And in truth, the spiritual disciplines can be done without the knowledge or acknowledgement of the presence of God. And that may, in like just the course of it, provide some benefit, some physiological benefit even, rest, solitude, fasting. These do things in our body physiologically just because. But without intention, they will do nothing for us spiritually. And I mean, Jesus kind of talks about this, even in the Sermon on the Mount, when he's talking about prayer. He's like, don't pray just in the streets for people to hear you. He's like, that's not a righteous prayer. Which is crazy to me to think that like there is a way to pray that's like unrighteous and like almost, I think, borderline sin. Just the act of prayer, which would be strange to tell somebody like, hey, Jimmy, that prayer you prayed, up on stage, sinful prayer. Like, you just prayed so you could be heard. That's what Jesus said. Like, I wouldn't judge that. I would never tell anyone that. But I think Jesus is kind of saying it's possible. Yep. Like, the spiritual disciplines do not automatically make us more righteous or spiritual. But they're good things to do when we're intending to do them for a connection with the Father. The other thing I just want to add is these are not things that, like, you must add. Like, if you're not practicing silence, I'm not sure you're going to heaven. No, that's not it either. If you're not practicing solitude or simplicity, like, I'm not sure you're really a Christian. No, that is not true. These are tools for us to employ. We can do them in different ways. There is not one prescribed way to do them. So we're going to be talking about these things through these 3 weeks so that we can learn about spiritual disciplines as a whole and about these spiritual disciplines in particular.
Hey guys, I just want to share, my sharing of these 3 weeks is going to be a little more testimonial just because I have watched my husband learning about this in like the Barry books and just getting into it deeply, and I admire that, and I've seen how it helps him. But it's been different for me. It's actually been a harder journey. I'm not used to sitting still. And I don't know if you can relate to me, but like when you begin your journey as a Christian, and especially if you're part of this congregation, like we're so good at being outward. We're so good at teaching the basics to anybody about Bible study, about, prayer, about fasting. And then we're so good at teaching about love and community, and that's all beautiful. Those are all spiritual disciplines. But I do think as I grew older, and especially more recently since I've been married, it's been obvious to me that there are some aspects of my development as a Christian that I had neglected, that I had not considered, So I was focusing on the wider, expanding outside of me, and I was neglecting the deeper internal work. And I think that's one of the things that I'm excited about this journey and learning about, what happens when I just sit still in the presence of God? What happens, how does God talk to me? Yes, I read the scriptures, and I love God, and I trust that His Spirit's talking to me. And that sounded weird at the beginning, but it's true. That's how I can imagine many people, in the Bible, even sharing about how God told them things. How did God tell them what to do? And I'm really excited, but I just want to say I'm on this journey with you. I'm learning. I'm at the beginning. It's tricky. And I hope that even as some people here is like, they do this naturally and they're very good at it and we can learn from each other. And some people like me find it hard. And so there's a little bit for everybody here, hopefully, through our sharing. And I'll share a little bit more later.
Yeah, and that's not to say I'm not at the start of my journey as well, but I just hope to share, as I have begun the journey, some things that I have learned. Share that with you. We changing slides? Okay, so over these 3 weeks, we'll discuss silence, solitude, and simplicity. These are disciplines that make us stop. And they are complements to the disciplines that make us go. Those ones that our congregation and family and churches are really good at. Generosity, service, fellowship, evangelism. Like Carolina says, going out, we're really good at. Going in and stopping, we're not as well versed. So silence, I just want to define as the practice of being in a quiet space and being quiet yourself. And really the practice of listening for or to God, letting the Father speak. So we are silent so that the Father can speak to us or through us. Solitude, as we'll get to next week, is just a subjective state in which you are isolated from input from other minds. So that's a definition, and we'll get into it later next week. But yeah, isolated from input from other minds is how we'll look at solitude. And simplicity, the way we'll look at that is considering it as an intentional limitation of activities that produces an unhurried and contented lifestyle. So I just wanted to open it up to you guys and ask you, and just to get a little bit of feedback, how would you rank these 3 disciplines from strongest to weakest in your life, and why? I doubt any of us are like, oh, I'm a 10 in all 3. So you don't have to feel bad about not being great at any of them or some of them. But I'm curious. Floor is open. How would you rank these 3 disciplines from strongest to weak? Paris.
Strongest, solitude. And weakest is silence.
Okay.
As people call it, I'm not very good at being silent and allowing myself to think, or like really just allowing God to speak to me. I always want to let me listen to podcasts, or let me listen to music, or let me do something because I don't like sitting and just with my thoughts and try to avoid that. So.
Okay. Right on. Thanks, Paris. Yeah.
I preface this with the way that strongest is a relative word.
Yeah, for sure.
But solitude probably, and then weakest would be like simplicity. I think I really got that TikTok brain of 4 different screens at once a lot of the time. So
Your Chrome has all the tabs open.
yeah, honestly, if I could have that little dude running on my class, it's probably
You love the TV with picture-in-picture, so you can play video games and watch at the same time. Okay, anyone else? Yeah, Alex.
Silence, I would way down there because, I'm going, okay, just the thought of I read scripture and meditate on it. Just the thought of sitting there going, okay, because I get into my new self, how long do I do this? How do I do this?
Yeah. I dig it. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And those are great questions. And one thing I want to impress, and probably will again and again, is that there's not one way to do these things. Silence, at the end of the night, I want to kind of brainstorm with everybody different ways and creative ways of practicing silence. Because, yes, the obvious and easy way is to set a timer and just sit and be quiet for 10 minutes, and I do that most mornings. But there's other ways to practice silence that might help us learn from it. So thank you guys for sharing and for just, breaking the silence of the audience. So silence is where are we going? The practice of being in a quiet space and being quiet yourself. The practice of listening for that gentle voice of God. Total silence in our lives and experience, in our daily life, is really rare. There's always something buzzing, something happening in the house, water running, a floor creaking, our breath, our heartbeat, in our office, in the car, right? There's always, even if you're quiet and not speaking, to be like, I hear nothing, is rare. And true, like, flat silence would be pretty unsettling. And would be freaky, right? And when you're watching a movie and, like, all of a sudden, like, the sound cuts out and, like, the music stops and all you hear is the character breath, you're like, oh, something's happening. This is bad. And silence kind of triggers feelings in us. I think silence is difficult to enter into and embrace. And a couple of the questions that we have to ask ourselves, why? Why do we avoid silence? How do we use words and our voice to hide? How do we use words and our voice to appear wise or to cover over our shortcomings? How do we use our voice and our words to elicit approval? And another question we got to ask is, if the Creator says we are good and pleasing to Him, how much do we need to say ourselves with our voice to prove this to ourselves or to others? Dallas Willard, dig this quote, he says, in not speaking, we resign how we appear, and dare we say how we are. We resign it to God. And that's hard. To just put our appearance and our being in God's hands and in God's voice. But practicing silence does this. It practices trust. That God says I'm loved. God says I am good. And I am pleasing to Him. So I don't got to run my mouth to prove it. Okay, so we're going to look at a few verses here and just ask the questions, what are the writers telling us that we might learn by practicing silence and by being silent in moments where Christ might have been silent? So the first verse, I'm just going to share some, this is a highlight, Matthew 12, 15 through 21. If you could read along with me, you can. I'm going to read these 7 verses. It says, aware of this, Jesus withdrew from that place. A large crowd followed him, and he healed all who were ill. He warned them not to tell others about him. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. Here is my servant whom I've chosen, the one I love, in whom I delight. I'll put my spirit on him. He'll proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he's brought justice through to victory. In his name, the nations will put their hope. Okay, so I'm going to share some things that I see, but I'm curious what you guys see about this idea. Jesus comes, and the prophecy is no one will hear his voice in the street. He won't come and be heard. He will not quarrel or cry out. It's interesting, it says he will proclaim justice, just not with his voice. So practicing silence doesn't mean not doing anything. It just means maybe we don't use our voice to do it. This word quarrel stands out to me. I think he doesn't quarrel. He doesn't fight. He doesn't argue. He's not trying to win and trying to prove his point. He's not trying to convince people he's right. That's hard for me. I like to be right. I want to prove myself right? I want to, find a Google result that says Carolina. It's not my voice, it's Google's. Jesus says no. I'm not here to argue about what the right thing to do is. I'm here to do the right thing to do. Anyway, does anyone else, anything stand out here to you about Jesus' silence and what we might learn from it? Yeah.
I think it speaks a lot on his dependence on God. Like, because in order to, like, people have to come to him in order for him to do his ministry. But, like, this means, like, he's not going out there for more. He's relying on God to bring people to. He's relying on God to procure an image for him. Like, he's relying on God to do all these things.
Yeah.
Rather than under his own human power.
Right. I mean, yeah. He's not going, come to me and I'll give you the facts of life. Like, or I'll give you, I'm living, like, he's saying, I'm just going about and people will find me and God will bring them by my actions, not my voice. So this silence is a trust that God brings him. And I think even in that, he has no need to impose himself. He's not like always going and just being like, what were you talking about? Let me tell you what I think. This is my opinion and my idea, and I just want to like let you know that I know what you're talking about, and I know it maybe a little bit better than you. So because I'm God and Jesus and the Son of God, and like learn from me, follow me, come follow me, I'll tell you everything. Right? He's not imposing himself on that. That is a silence that's difficult for me to practice. To be having a conversation and not to just be like, yeah, let me tell you what I think. But just be like, to listen to what other people think. Or to listen to what other people need. It's not my voice that meets the needs, it's my actions. And if I'm talking, I'm not going to hear them or be able to listen to them. I think it says, right, I didn't put this up there, but no one will hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. I just thought, what words of ours have broken bruised reeds or snuffed out smoldering wicks? Do words bring justice or do actions? Practicing silence might teach us to be like Jesus by doing the right thing to do, not by arguing about what the right thing to do is. Yeah.
Oh, I was just pointing out that in previous studies I've had with this particular, it was speaking the fact that he would not be the one. Many of the prophets, many of the rabbis would stand in the streets and pray and proclaim out loud. But he would be in the background. He wouldn't, and many of them would debate long genealogies. And Jesus, God is saying he will not do this.
Yeah.
He will not be the one screaming my prophecy from the street corners.
Yeah. But
and snuffing out. Literally, you said the same thing. How many times have we've been proclaiming what we believe, that we've like snuffed out other people's smoldering, like, I think I want to come to church, and then we tell them, we start counting the cost with them before they know what's to be counted.
Yeah. You start telling them how bad they are, and that's the reason they need. You're right. You do need to come to church because you're terrible. And they're like, I don't think I want to be at church with you. Instead of just saying, yeah, come be with the Father with me. All right, next verse, Isaiah 30, verse 15 through 17. This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. But you would have none of it. You said, no, we'll flee on horses. Therefore, you will flee. You said, we will ride off on swift horses. Therefore, your pursuers will be swift. 1,000 will flee at the threat of one. At the threat of 5, you'll all flee away. Till you're left like a flagstaff on a mountain top, like a banner on a hill. Here, the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, is saying, in quietness and trust is your strength. He's not saying in your bargaining, in your pleading, in your trying to get a good deal and talk your way out of trouble is your strength. And your quietness and trust in the Father. There's no calling on someone other than God for help. But practicing silence might teach us to be like Jesus and wait for the Lord to reveal his salvation plan. And as I read this, I considered just Jesus' silence when under trial. And how he did not defend himself in that moment. But he submitted. We could say, yeah, he submitted to what people were doing with him. I think he submitted to God's in control. And God will save me when he's ready to save me. Turns out that ready to save was after he died. But he trusted it. Why do I need to argue with my voice, my righteousness, if the Father has already declared me righteous? We practice silence to learn that the Lord is the one who declares us righteous. I'm going to move on and maybe get a little more feedback from this passage. But James chapter 3, verse 2. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. I've read this a lot in a way of being like, yeah, because nobody can keep their mouth in check and nobody is perfect. But in thinking about it in terms of just being quiet and silence, I think James here is saying that quietness, silence, and a practice of silence equals self-discipline and is a high level of self-discipline. By our words, we try to take control of situations. And we try to take control of others. But here, he's kind of saying it's with our many words that we lose control of ourselves. Has anyone ever, lost control? Lost self-control when, just talking to someone in a conversation? Casey, do you want to tell us about this moment you're thinking of?
I mean, that's one of my core faults, right? Is sometimes I start speaking before I think, and then I say things without processing them, and then it comes out wrong, and then I try to fix it, and I dig myself further in the hole, and it's like, man, if I had just been, silent, I would not be in this hole.
Yes. Yeah. Any relate? For sure. Yeah, good morning.
Yeah, I think sometimes I have a deep desire to fix things, so I think sometimes I try to use my words to fix a situation, and I find that I make it worse.
Yeah.
And sometimes just listening to a problem and just even, because sometimes, I'm talking about relationships and people, sometimes people just want a listening ear, you to be silent and just listen. But for some reason, somewhere I picked up along the way that I need to offer solution. and I don't like it when someone tries to do that to me, so I don't know why I sometimes lack self-control when it comes to other people.
Yeah, I think so. No, that need to offer solutions is deep ingrained in many of us. But how many times have I been in a conversation and someone says something and I'm like, oh yeah, let me fix that. And they're like, yeah, no, if you had just waited, I was going to get to that part. And then I was like, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, so you don't need me to just impose my advice on you, unsolicited. Gotcha, thanks. I'm sorry. But this also says they're able to keep their whole body in check. Practicing silence might help us be self-disciplined in other areas of our life as well. I don't know what areas of your life where you're seeking self-discipline, but it might be, if you think about it, what's harder, being quiet and taming my tongue, or this thing? Self-discipline is a muscle we practice and grow. It's not like I'm only self-disciplined in this area and a little, okay, you can use that and build on it and grow, and God gives us victories in some areas in order to be victorious in others and to grow as his creations. Silence and just keeping our mouth and keeping a rein on our tongue will help us be self-disciplined in other areas of our lives. And finally, James, he has a lot to say about this. Same chapter, a few verses later. The tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. I wrote, silence prevents forest fires. It's interesting, right? That a minute ago we're reading how our words could snuff out a smoldering wick. But also, our words can start a great fire. Just practicing silence has helped me keep my mouth shut in a few moments where I wanted to say something. And you know the adage of like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all? I actually checked with Carolina after this. We were in this conversation, and someone shared a story, and this story like triggered something in my heart. And I wanted to ask a question that would have been making some assumptions and judgments on that person. And actually, it was the second time that I had wanted to do that. The first time it happened, I didn't do it because I didn't think of it in time. And then later I was like, you know what would really get them? This line. So then it comes up again, and I'm like, ooh, I got him. But I don't know why the Spirit gave me some self-discipline and I didn't say it. And I was like, later, I was like, Carolina, should I, this is what I wanted to say. Should I have said that? She goes, no, that would have been really judgmental. That would have been really hurtful. I was like, okay, close call. A great forest may have been set on fire. I think about waiting your turn to speak versus responding to what someone has said. But then I thought, in practicing silence, like, why do I sometimes feel the need to respond at all? Why not rather be curious and ask another question? Instead of giving my point of view, learn more about them and ask another question. Taming our tongue doesn't always mean being silent. It might mean being curious and just not imposing ourselves. Curious people are quiet and they listen. Practicing silence may help us be better listeners and more curious is the word I'm looking for. So those are just some ideas about the benefits of practicing silence. In a minute, I want to discuss maybe some creative ways we could practice trust through the spiritual discipline of silence. But you had some things to share first?
Yeah, I
Try
just
to wrap
like
up.
that with the spiritual disciplines. I like that you said there's no one perfect way of doing this. Also, I think you can start in small like moments, like we have done with the teens in our teen classes, and we have 2 minutes of silence and meditation, and that's a little practice. And I know some of them do meditate at home and do use this practice at home, and it helps them. And it helps them connect with God. It helps them, like Adam said, physically to be like with their anxiety or their worries, and I think that's it's amazing. And one of the things I did this year that was new, and Margaret was there, thank you, because she guided us. We went on a silent retreat, but I wasn't ready to go on a silent retreat by myself. I think it was just too intimidating, too scary for me to be like all by myself somewhere random. So a group of us, women, we went to this lovely retreat house, and we were around each other, but we were silent for like over 24 hours. I don't know if it was 24 or a little more. That was a lot more than I had ever been quiet without speaking. But a couple of things of highlights that I learned about myself. I have such a hard time sometimes concentrating even in the quiet. So I started like coloring. So I was silent and I was coloring, and all these thoughts like about how amazing God is just came to my mind, and it just made me feel more calm, and I was able to like meditate on some things that that I had been, kind of neglecting about myself, and I was scared that I was gonna have worrying, scary thoughts, right? Like, that God's gonna reveal some deep deep secret in my heart, and I was like, this is gonna be overwhelming. But actually, all that came out was a lot of gratitude, and I was so happy. And then at one point, we practiced a little solitude. It wasn't completely solitude because we were around each other. But there was a moment where everybody went for a walk, and I went up to my room, sat by the window. I was reading, and then I saw these birds. I'm not a bird watcher. I didn't even know, but it was basically a blue jay and a cardinal, right? I've never seen them so close and so clearly, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And later I shared with the sisters, and they were like, we didn't see any birds. So I felt special because in that moment I felt like, wow, like God is so beautiful. And he's so special. He's like, he knows I'm nervous about this, and he's like, through these things I'm able to see his love and how he sees me. So it was a beautiful experience. I would love to do it again. And that's just how I began. At home, I sometimes try to do the same. I do a little watercolor painting. I'm not good at it, but it helps me. It helps me just connect with creativity and with God and his love. So those are just some ideas.
Thanks. Yeah, it's we can be super creative in how we practice silence. And even thinking about silence, yes, it's not talking, but also silence as I'm not imposing myself, I'm being curious, I'm not interrupting, I am waiting. These are practices of silence that we can have throughout our time. So what's important about these practices is, one, that we try to do them regularly with some sort of rhythm. Practicing, randomly does not prepare us as well for the moment when we need to be like Christ and when the moment calls. But practicing regularly is how we build that unconscious character of quiet confidence and trust in the Lord. But going into them, as we said before, intentionally. I'm doing this so that I can connect with the presence of the Father and trust in him. And then, other than that, the world is the oyster. So I'm going to open it up. I'm going to give 3 ideas, and then I'm curious what your ideas are. And my idea, we already said sit and be silent for a time. Just listening for the Spirit. Carolina talked about spiritual retreats, or even having a silent part of your day. I'm going to have a silent morning or a silent evening. One idea I had was to make a spiritual plan and then not tell anyone about it, but just do it. Man, I get so much encouragement from just hear someone saying that's a great idea. Then I don't have to do I even need to do it now? I got my reward. So to practice silence, I want to make a plan, and I'm just not going to tell anyone about it. And I'm going to do that at a regular rhythm. That's a practice of silence. Another idea, plan on entering a time of fellowship determined to only ask questions. And perhaps to only answer questions. But if someone doesn't ask, then I don't tell them. I just ask them another question. And I want to learn. I'm not going to impose myself. I'm going to be silent and ask a question. And then another idea I had was to practice a day of only loving speech. Only what builds people up. No, and not even creative, or what's the word? Constructive criticism. No criticism, unconstructive or constructive. Only compliments, only loving speech, all day. I think, we might not all have an ability to just be I'm not going to talk at all for 6 hours today, and I'm going to be silent. But how can I say, I'm going to take this period of the day and I'm only going to speak in this manner and not in this. It's a practice of holding our tongue and holding back and letting God speak. So, any other ideas? Creative ways to practice silence. What do you think? We'll do, take a couple ideas. I'm curious what's been stirring in your heads and hearts. Daily meditation. Yeah, for sure. Like, what would that look like?
Well, I don't know, I've never done it.
Okay. Okay.
If somebody knows, they should speak up.
Well, yes. Would anyone like to give an idea of what that could look like? I don't want to. I'm asking the question.
What do you think?
Oh, does anyone practice daily meditation? And what is that? What does that look like, Manny? How do you practice that?
One of the things I do in that, I'll set aside a chunk of time, and it feels really weird when you share it out loud, because it seems so awkward, like verbalizing. But the name of God, Yahweh, there was this thing my sister shared with me at one time. She said, when you don't know what to pray, just inhale and exhale Yahweh. So you inhale Yah, exhale Way. And you focus on only God's name as you take in the breath of life and exhale the anxiety, the stress, the worry. And I'll just sit for minutes and just inhale and exhale. Yah, Way. Yah, Way. And sometimes I need to do it like when I'm going to bed and my brain is on fire with things. And I'll just lay in bed and I'll just say God's name. And sometimes it elicits prayer, and sometimes it doesn't. And either way, I feel like I'm trying to just connect with God at the core level of the name. When you look through the biblical principle, that name it had no vowels originally, and it wasn't something you spoke. And I think that has helped me in my last couple of years. I've been practicing this, and it's a great way for me to calm myself and just focus only on God.
It's
Not
beautiful.
on what I want from God, not on what God's going to do or what I'm hoping for. Just simply thinking about His name.
Right on. Dig it. Is that?
It just sparked a memory
Yeah.
that I don't know who told me this, but Yahweh is the sound your breath makes. Like when you breathe in and out, it's like the sound like what a baby makes, like Yahweh. And that's I think that's like
Maybe.
where it comes from.
I mean,
So-
great question.
I mean, I'm kind of asking
It's
kind of.
beautifully possible. I don't have a definitive answer for that, but it's lovely. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for asking a question. Thanks, Manny. Any other creative ideas for practicing silence? Yeah, Kristen.
For me, this is just recent, because I definitely have a hard time being still, but writing, like whether it's journaling or for me, I just love writing, but I would just not take the time to even try. And recently I did that and just took my journal book, and next thing you know, I've got a whole thing, just wrote down a whole page of stuff. And so it's now just, and it was one of my best times and stuff, honestly.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Maybe not using your words, but writing. And we communicate and think so much slower when we write than when we speak. It's good. Yeah, Kara.
The idea you had of like only speaking loving words made me think of this, where it's like it's not actually being silent, but it's like minimizing our own words and our own thoughts. It's like trying to take a day, like a half day of like I'm only gonna speak scriptures today. Like I'm only gonna say words that are in like the Bible. Like I'm not gonna say like Ephesians 4 or whatever says this, but it's like I'm just gonna say it, and whether they pick up like, oh, he's quoting a Bible verse right now, or just whatever, like silence of your own words and emphasizing God's opinion in His words.
It's a beautiful idea. I dig that. Yeah, Gab, an
I got a
idea.
buddy who runs with like no music or nothing, right?
Who does what?
He runs, just like walk
Runs,
around.
yes.
Like you can't really talk a lot when you're running.
Nope.
It's kind of force you to be quiet.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean, that's, I think, yeah, running, it's hard, running. Running's hard. But the last couple of days I've gone running and I just have left my headphones at home. And it's kind of like for me, it's more about the solitude of it and not having someone else's voice but there is a silence aspect to it too, of what am I hearing, what am I seeing? And sometimes that's a good question of like, I'm running, I'm hearing the wind, I'm hearing birds, I'm seeing people like live their lives. What is God telling me in these moments? And hearing that. Okay, who? Okay, I'm gonna go to Dave over here, then we'll go Margaret, Paris, and Allie. Did you have something?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll close. So Dave, Margaret, Paris, Allie.
I think a good practice could try to find time with people who you think are silent and don't speak very often. I have an excellent time with Colin Berquist. We're sometimes in our conversations, they just like stop. And it's just like silence, and it's enjoying each other's company, which can be really helpful in connecting. So maybe if you're more talkative, trying to find somebody with that and trying to like meet their pace of how they're just sitting in silence. That can be a really good way of doing that. And I experience that a lot and really enjoy it with my time with Colin.
Thanks for that idea. Yeah, for sure. Bart.
Well, I started like just in the morning before I even get out of bed to have like a 10 or 15 minute just quiet, like to focus on my breath or a scripture or something. And I have a really, I think Manny said, when your brain's on fire or your body even, you just can't relax. You can't settle down. There's something, I've just recently learned like connecting with, like maybe I feel it in my chest or my back or something, and just I say, the Lord is near. The Lord is near. Just to remind myself, you're safe, you're okay. You know, because that's, some of us missed that nurturing when we were young. There wasn't someone there telling us, it's okay, the Lord is near. And to just be reminded of that, that God can fill that emptiness, that space. And it's so intimate and special for me. And yeah, I do. Yeah, I try to do that each morning.
It's beautiful. Oh, thank you. The Lord is near. The Lord's name. These mantras, these phrases, and truths to rest on. Oh, wonderful. Paris.
One of my favorite times to practice silence is when I'm in the car, which is sometimes weird when other people are also in the car and they're like, "You're not speaking," and I was like, "Yeah." I'm just like sitting there not saying anything, and I think it helps me like when I'm finally being like, "Okay, let's not put music on. Let's not put something on," because when I'm in my day, like I always have headphone aches and like I need something going. And when I actually sit there, I'm like, "Oh, how am I thinking about these drivers? How am I paying attention? Where is God taking me right now?" Like, it helps me like just be more centered about what's happening and going on in my surroundings. But even when people are in the car, sometimes just being like, I'm not going to say anything because everyone knows I talk all the time. So when I don't talk, it's usually concerning. But knowing that that's okay, that's okay. Like I don't have to fill the space. Like because I feel compelled to do that. Like, I don't want people to feel uncomfortable. But I'm like, I don't need to fill the space with words. We can just sit here together. And that's okay.
Love that. I feel like that ties with David. I just hear just even the bravery of like, I'm with someone and I don't need to talk. God, so that's okay. Our friendship has not collapsed. Let's just practice being quiet. And okay, cool. All right, Allie, close us out.
Real quick, just idea, you said an idea for, being silent. Because I moved to Mount Olivet in August to be closer to Jerry, and there's, kid you not, 63 stairs up to my foot, and from the bottom, and 83 to Jerry's, so.
Wow.
I love, but just going, maybe I can take, time each morning, each day. People are going to stairwell, but not many. Just going up and down the stairs and seeing where God takes me. That's what made me think that when you were talking about running.
Yeah, I love it. And even just being quiet and going and seeing where God takes me. Like, yeah, I love that. Seeing where God takes me. Amen. It is 8:01, so we are going to not practice silence. That was a part of our idea, was to have a moment of silence. We had a moment of silence to start, and next week we'll start with a moment of silence as well. I would love to hear next week if you do find a way to take time and practice silence in this next week. We'd love to hear it. We'd be grateful for you to share it. But if you want to come in here and go, yes, I practice silence, but my practice is telling me not to tell you, that's also cool. Right on. So thanks, everybody. Hope you have a... Oh, hold on.
sent out some resources as well by the end of the classes.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I've got a list of resources and books, and we'll provide that as time comes. Okay, thank you.